Let's talk about daily drivers. Not those. Let's talk about the most extreme yet somehow still practical cars that you can buy. Supercar daily drivers. Everyone loves when supercar owners actually drive their cars, but what are factually and realistically the best daily driver supercars out there? I wanted to know for sure, so I looked into basically every single supercar on the market, and I was pretty surprised with how many supercars could actually make a half decent daily. Now, for this video's sake, I'm being pretty loose on the supercar title, so you're gonna have to deal with that. I rated every single car based on two different scores. One for performance, which is power, speed, acceleration, and that sort of stuff. And another score for practicality, where I took into consideration comfort, suspension, storage, drivetrain, anything that makes a car a half decent daily. I scored each car from 1 to 10 for each category and then put them on a graph to measure their performance in comparison to their practicality to determine the best daily driver. So let's dive into it. Up first, the Dodge Viper ACR, packing a 645 horsepower V10 with a manual transmission. The ACR will take you from 0 to 60 in just 3.3 seconds. The seats in the Viper, assuming you don't have a drag build with super thin carbon fiber or metal seats, are fairly wide bolstered seats, which are pretty comfortable for long drives. It also has a fairly spacious trunk, which could comfortably fit your weekly grocery run. Just don't try and fit golf clubs or a Costco haul in there. However, it has no cup holders. The suspension is set up for the track, so it's extremely stiff, meaning you feel every single bump in the road. The ACR has a front lip which sits just a couple inches off the ground, so bumps, driveways, and curbs might as well just be your worst enemy, especially if you have the extreme aero package. And if there's any rain on the ground, well, you might as well just not leave the house. If you know, you know. The Dodge Viper scores a 9 out of 10 for performance and a 3 out of 10 for practicality, making it a pretty poor choice for a daily, although where there's a will, there's a way. Up next, the Maserati MC20 with a twin-turbo V6 packing 620 horsepower. It has decent performance. On the practicality side, it has an option for leather seats, which have a solid amount of padding and adjustable lumbar support for comfort on long drives. The MC20 also has adjustable suspension, which can make it a pretty smooth ride on the roads. Other than that, the interior is not the most practical. I would probably avoid going for a coffee run in this car because you have no cup holders. It has rear-wheel drive with pretty good traction control, so light rain shouldn't be an issue, but don't try and go in the snow. Overall, the MC20 gets an 8 on performance and a 4 on the practicality scale. Moving on to the Acura NSX, which has a hybrid 573 horsepower twin-turbo V6, which will take you from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. It has adjustable seats, which are supposed to be pretty comfortable and fit tall drivers well, which I can appreciate, which I barely fit in any of these cars. The suspension can be adjusted to be incredibly soft, softer than most supercars, making it a pretty comfortable ride. It has a clip-on cup holder, so that doesn't really count, and a decent-sized trunk behind the engine bay, which is pretty big for a supercar and more than big enough for a weekly grocery run. The NSX is all-wheel drive and has pretty high ground clearance compared to most supercars, making it a solid contender for practicality while moving around town. The performance just isn't there with some other cars, so it gets a 7 for performance and a 7 for practicality, but overall, not a bad choice. Next up, the Porsche 992 GT3 RS. However, there is a massive caveat on this car. If you have the factory roll cage or any roll cage installed, I would not consider this for a daily at all. The GT3 RS has no trunk and no frunk, meaning that if you want to have any bags in your car, they have to go in the passenger seat, or you have to mess with the roll cage and try and stick it in there. Not fun for a daily. However, if you don't have a roll cage, it could make a pretty decent daily with a spacious amount of room behind the driver and passenger seats that could easily fit luggage, groceries, or even a kid. I'm just kidding. Please do not try this. It is very illegal. It also has a singular cup holder in the middle, which is a plus, but if you're trying to go on a coffee run with your girlfriend or wife, probably not the best car to take. However, we all know the 3RS is a track-focused car, so even the suspension in its softest setting is still going to be extremely tense for normal road conditions. And if you option for the carbon bucket seats, you're going to feel every bump in the road and your legs are going to be feeling not too hot after a long road trip. The standard Porsche sport seats are pretty comfortable though. The 3RS is rear-wheel drive, but Porsche has good traction control, so light rain shouldn't really be an issue. It also has a front lift system, so getting out of driveways or going over speed bumps, you should be able to handle it. Overall, the 3RS scores a 9 in performance with a 5 in practicality. Now, bear with me now as we do have a few of these C8 Corvettes to cover, and if you don't think this car is a supercar, just deal with it. Starting with the newly released ZR1, which packs a 5.5-liter twin-turbo V8 pushing 1,064 horsepower, going from 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds and a top speed of 233 miles per hour. It is available with comfort seats, which could be decent for long drives or driving around town. It comes with cup holders and a modern infotainment system. It has a front axle lift system for driveways and speed bumps and pretty soft suspension for the street, even though it is a track setup, so it is bearable to drive on the roads. The ZR1 has no frunk, but it does have a rear trunk, even though I think it's slightly smaller than the standard C8, but it is still big enough to fit luggage and even golf clubs, which is a huge bonus. However, at the end of the day, it is a 1,000 horsepower rear-wheel drive car, and in bad conditions, you probably don't want to be driving this on the roads. Overall, the ZR1 gets a 9 out of 10 for performance and a 6 out of 10 for practicality. Similar to the ZR1, we have the Z06, which is a slightly less powerful and less sporty version of the ZR1. However, along with the rear trunk, the Z06 also has a frunk for even more storage space. It also has softer magnetic ride control suspension for a not as bumpy ride compared to its more extreme younger brother, as well as a front lift system. So overall, the Z06 gets a 8 out of 10 for performance and a 7 out of 10 for practicality. And another Corvette with the ZR1X, which debatably could be the car that brings Chevy into the hypercar game, which is kind of insane to say. It comes with the same 1,064 horsepower twin-turbo V8 from the ZR1, but combined with an electric motor to make 12,050 horsepower, go from 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds, and do the quarter mile in sub 9 seconds. Pretty wild from a Corvette. It also has the electronic dampening suspension, a front axle lift, and cup holders. However, like the ZR1, there is no frunk, but it does have a trunk, which, like we've talked about before, is pretty decent for a supercar. What puts the ZR1X above the Z06 and the ZR1 is the all-wheel drive system. Yes, it still makes 1,250 horsepower, and that's not super advantageous for bad driving conditions on the street. But the hybrid all-wheel drive system makes traction pretty easy to find, and out of all the Corvettes we've covered so far, I'd be the most comfortable driving this in a rainstorm. Overall, for the ZR1X, we have our first 10 on the list for performance and a 7 in terms of practicality. Next up, the 911 GT3. Similar to the GT3 RS, the GT3 is a slightly better daily with softer suspension, storage space behind the seats, and unlike the 3 RS, the GT3 does have a front trunk for even more storage. And this is the first car on the list that is actually somewhat common to see as a daily driver in real life, earning itself an 8 in performance and an 8 in practicality. This is a pretty good car you could take both to the track and comfortably drive on a day-to-day basis. Next up, the Aston Martin DBS, which is our first V12 on the list. And is there anything better than a V12 daily? I don't think so. The DBS is technically a Grand Tourer car, but arguably I think it's a supercar, as it makes over 700 horsepower, goes 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, and has a top speed of over 200 miles per hour. It has super comfortable seats, a lot of room for taller drivers, and is built to drive and sustain long distances. It also has a trunk with more than enough storage for a few bags, super comfortable air suspension, and a pretty high front lip, earning itself an 8 in performance and a 9 in practicality. Similar to the DBS is the DB12, a slightly more luxurious Grand Tourer car from Aston Martin, packing a twin-turbo V8 that makes just under 700 horsepower. It has 20% more trunk space than the DBS and dedicated storage cubbies behind the driver and passenger seats, coming in at a 7 in performance and a 9 in practicality. Overall, I think this is probably the best daily on the list so far. Next up, the Ferrari 12 Cylindri. 12 Cylindri meaning 12 cylinders, I think. It makes 830 horsepower with a top speed of 211 miles per hour. Similar to the Aston Martins, it's a Grand Tourer style car with a pretty big trunk sufficient for bags, grocery runs, just maybe not your monthly Costco haul. It has cup holders, a dedicated phone slot, and comfortable seats for long drives. It also has a higher ride height than most Ferraris and a front lift system for driveways and speed bumps. Overall, the 12 Cylindri scores a 9 in performance and an 8 in practicality, as it's less luxury and more performance focused than the Aston Martins. A very similar car next with the 812 Superfast, the predecessor to the 12 Cylindri. With a 6.5-liter naturally aspirated V12, it makes 789 horsepower and does 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. It has adaptive air suspension for smooth driving and a massive trunk that can comfortably fit groceries, luggage, and even golf clubs, which I can appreciate. It is a front-engine rear-wheel drive V12, so it does tend to get a little slippery on the back wheels when heavy on the throttle, so be careful on wet roads or bad conditions. The A12 Superfast earns itself a 9 out of 10 on performance and a 8 in practicality, just like its successor, but personally, I like the A12 more, so it gets one slot higher. If you thought we were done with Corvettes, I'm sorry, because now we are covering the best Corvette daily driver on the list, the E-Ray. A model that's not really talked about much, but it's a hybrid V8 that makes 655 horsepower. It has a softer ride than the Z06 and utilizes an all-wheel drive system, so rain or bad conditions shouldn't really be an issue. And unlike the ZR1 and ZR1X, it has a frunk for even more storage space. It even has a full electric mode to pull out silently and not wake your neighbors or make loud noises, which is pretty thoughtful. I think it can also do like 30 miles or something like that just on electric, but I'm not sure. Overall, the E-Ray gets an 8 out of 10 for performance and a 9 out of 10 for practicality. Next up, the McLaren GT. What's especially cool about this car, if you don't know much about it, is that it was literally designed to be daily driven. It might not be as extreme as the other McLaren cars of the era like the 720S, but it might just be the perfect daily driver supercar. It has a twin-turbo V8 pushing over 600 horsepower and going 0 to 60 in just over 3 seconds, so it still has pretty good performance numbers. It does sit quite a bit higher than other McLarens, which isn't great for aesthetics, but does help with front lip clearance and softer suspension. The interior is built for comfort and less aggressive than other models with more storage space, softer seats, and is intended for long travels and road trips. The GT also has the most storage space out of any typical mid-engine supercar in the entire world, with McLaren building storage above the engine big enough to fit luggage and golf clubs. Overall, the GT gets an 8 on performance and a 9 for practicality, as this was literally created to be daily driven. Next up, the Nissan GT-R, which it's debatable if this is a supercar, but for its performance, it is pretty practical. The GT-R uses a twin-turbo V6, making 565 horsepower and goes 0 to 60 in sub 3 seconds. Plus, you can pick up your kids from football practice and then launch control while leaving the parking lot. The seats are fairly comfortable, but the suspension is tighter than most road cars, although it is still softer than most supercars. So driving on the street isn't that big of an issue. There's more than enough space in the GT-R with the rear seats and the trunk that you can fit just about anything you need. And because it's all-wheel drive, you can take this thing pretty much anywhere, which a lot of owners actually do, which I personally love. Overall, the GT-R earns itself a 7 for performance and a 10 for practicality. Next up, the most niche car on the list by far is the Aston Martin Vanquish Zagato shooting brake. Based off the Vanquish platform, Zagato turned the 580 horsepower V12 supercar into a shooting brake, which has more than enough storage in the back to fit pretty much anything you could need and is on par with a normal hatchback or small SUV. It has dedicated storage cubbies right behind both the passenger and driver seats, and I want one of these. I think they're pretty cool, although quite a bit out of my price range. It's set up like a Grand Tour with moderately soft suspension and a tall ride height, so you don't have to worry about bumps or driveways or anything like that. Overall, the shooting brake scores a 7 in performance and a 10 in practicality. Next, the GT3 from Ferrari, which I think is one of the most underrated Ferraris out there. With space for a family of 4, all-wheel drive, and a V12 pushing almost 700 horsepower. It has soft suspension, a comfortable interior, and a fairly high front lip with an optional front lift kit. The trunk is essentially just a hatchback with just as much space as any normal hatchback or small SUV would have, making it an incredibly reasonable daily driver you can take to the grocery store or to the ski slopes. The GT4Lusso scores itself an 8 in performance and a 10 in practicality. And this is a pretty solid pick for a family daily driver supercar. Up next, one of my personal favorites, the Porsche 911 Turbo S. With a twin-turbo flat-six pushing 640 horsepower, all-wheel drive, and 0 to 60 in just over 2 seconds, this thing is a rocket. And unlike the GT3 and GT3 RS, the Turbo S keeps the rear seats, and although they are pretty small, you could fit a family of 4. It has softer suspension than the GT3 series cars, but can tighten up for track days. It has comfier seats than them and is built as essentially the perfect daily driver. It also comes with a front lift kit so you don't scrape your fender, and overall the Turbo S scores a 9 in performance and a 9 in practicality. In second place for the best daily, we have the Mercedes AMG GT63S Pro. A similar type of car to the Turbo S, but obviously the engine's in the front and not the back. It comes packed with a 630 horsepower twin-turbo V8 all-wheel drive and 4 seats, meaning you can take your whole family to a track day or to the ski slopes. The interior has all the creature comforts like cup holders, chargers, and is focused on luxury and comfort, but still ready to hit the track at any moment. It already has a spacious trunk to begin with, but you can also fold down the rear seats for enough room to fit pretty much anything you want or could possibly need. Overall, it scores a 8 in performance and a 10 in practicality. Lastly, in first place for the best daily driver supercar on the planet, we have, drumroll please, the Koenigsegg Gemera, which was literally designed to be the world's first hypercar daily driver, and that's just an insane sentence. Although it's not released yet, it'll push an astonishing 2,300 horsepower through a modified 1,500 horsepower twin-turbo V8 paired with an 800 horsepower electric motor. It does 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds, has 4 seats, all-wheel drive, cup holders, creature comforts for every seat, a hatchback for storage, adaptive suspension, and looks insane. It can fit anything from luggage to skis to golf clubs, possibly even a full month's supply of groceries from Costco. The Gemera scores itself a 10 for performance and a 10 for practicality, as it's literally a daily driver hypercar. I mean, how much more insane can you get? Making it the ultimate daily driver with the perfect blend of power and comfort. Thank you for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe for more. See you in the next one.